This is Dr. Rob Harder with the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast, Making Your World Better. What does it take to be an effective nonprofit leader today? What are the biggest challenges? What are the biggest obstacles? How should nonprofits fundraise in an economy that is constantly changing? All of these reasons combined led me to start this show. And it's my hope that through this series, people can learn not only what it takes to be an effective nonprofit organization, but to hear from effective leaders who are successfully making a positive impact in their communities. We hope you enjoy the show as together we hear how they are making their world better. Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. Well, I don't know if you know this, but today is World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. And so today's episode is all focused completely on human trafficking. And I have a guest on the show who's going to talk about the foundation she leads that's really focused on this critical issue. And I'm convinced that human trafficking today is one of the most overlooked humanitarian crises of our time. Now, I know there's a lot of excellent organizations that are really focused on this issue, specifically focused on the prevention side and the rescue aspect of this major problem. But when it comes to the aftercare for the victims caught up in human trafficking, there's not as many organizations that are really focused on this. Well, my guest today is leading a foundation, as I mentioned, that's really focused on the aftercare aspect of human trafficking. My guest is Nikki Clifton. She's the head of the UPS Foundation. Now, all of you have heard of UPS, but maybe didn't know that they had a social impact arm simply called the UPS Foundation. They've been around for a long time and poured millions into charitable causes. And right now they're focused completely on the human trafficking issue and specifically on the aftercare of victims caught up in human trafficking. I think you're going to really appreciate hearing from Nikki today. They're doing such good work and really putting a lot of resources towards this issue. And really our goal today is to raise awareness around World Day Against Trafficking in Persons. So I'm really glad you've tuned in. Now on to the show. Well, welcome to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. I have Nikki Clifton here on the show. Nikki, thanks for taking time out of your really busy schedule to join us on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. You bet. Well, as we were talking before we hit record, I think this will be really good for my listeners to learn a little bit more about the UPS Foundation, just because I think it is probably one of those best kept secrets of all the things you do. And just what I've learned in a short amount of time, you do a lot, and specifically around the issue of human trafficking. And so it is now estimated, for my listeners again, it's estimated that around 27.6 million people worldwide are victims of human trafficking. So that's a staggering number. There's no doubt that human trafficking today has really become one of the most overlooked humanitarian crises of our time. Now, there's a lot of excellent organizations, focused on this. Your foundation is one of those, but oftentimes the focus is a lot of times just on the prevention side or the rescue aspect of the human trafficking problem. Now, you focus a lot on the aftercare, and because sometimes the aftercare of victims is often overlooked and for whatever reason. So let's talk about that. Let's start with what is UPS Foundation doing, and particularly when it comes to the aftercare piece.
Sure. Thanks so much. So the UPS Foundation has existed for more than 70 years, and we've returned $3 billion to communities where we live and work around the globe. And so we are really proud of our support, in particular on anti-human trafficking. Our mission at the UPS Foundation is to create a more equitable and just world. And combating human trafficking is just one of the ways that we're fulfilling that mission. As you said, most of the programs are aimed at combating human trafficking by focusing on prevention and rescue. But the longstanding needs of survivors are very important. And that's why we've partnered with Atlanta-based Wellspring Living on a $1 million 3-year systems change grant to help survivors get back on their feet. Wellspring is a residential program, and their interventions are survivor-informed. They prioritize the survivor's dignity and well-being. They have wraparound services that support their survivors. And with our support, Wellspring Living can help scale the successful healing model and that they've created in Atlanta, but also in other cities, starting with training, with mentorship, and with workforce development.
No, excellent. Well, another thing to highlight on the aftercare piece is really the housing situation. And the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development actually recently released a report that found that the demand for housing assistance, including programs specifically meant for trafficking survivors, is far greater than the resources available. It's interesting because there's a housing crisis across the board right in our country. But then when it comes to survivors, it hits them just as hard, maybe even harder. So other factors like documentation requirements, criminal records, credit issues, lack of or poor rental history, and immigration status, all of those things can really present additional barriers for these survivors who are experiencing homelessness or housing instability. Now, I know the USPS Foundation is doing a lot of different things. Not necessarily, you're not in the housing business per se, but you're helping with that. Maybe you could talk a bit about the housing situation and what is the foundation doing to try to help with that situation.
Sure, I'm happy to. You're right that housing instability is a huge barrier for victims to get back on their feet and survive and thrive. And so I hearken back to our partnership with Wellspring Living. We have supported their Welcome Home campaign. And we partnered with Delta Airlines. Each of us pitched in $1 million each. And then we helped raise $20 million to support a residential program on the Wellspring Living's campus in Atlanta. It will provide housing and dignified housing where folks actually want to live and look forward to coming in a safe environment. The space is beautiful. It feels like home, and it feels like a place that mostly these young ladies would want to come and be able to get the restoration that they need to get back on their feet. I can't underscore how important this is to shift the models away from being a victim to being a survivor. When you've got a safe place, a kitchen, a bed, a pillow, a place to rest your head, and you know that someone's looking out for you, you can then create the path to recovery. In addition to Wellspring, we're also really proud to partner with an organization called Tahirih Justice Center. Tahirih is based in Virginia, and they provide legal support and aftercare services specifically for immigrant survivors of trafficking. And so there are so many different aspects to the continuum of anti-human trafficking work. And we've just tried to pull out places where we can support the best with our resources.
Oh, good work. Well, along those lines, I'm sure you work a lot with law enforcement and other government agencies. So this is a broader question, not just for UPS Foundation, but for all nonprofits that do the same. How do nonprofits collaborate best with law enforcement and government agencies to address this human trafficking issue more effectively?
Yes. So at UPS, we have a multifaceted approach to disruption. It incorporates policy. So we have an anti-human trafficking policy where we don't allow our employees to use company resources to procure sex on company time. It's unfortunate that you have to have a policy about that, but we do. We also educate our employees, and then we've got our philanthropic arm. We work very closely with an organization called Truckers Against Trafficking, and they help work with law enforcement in different states and cities to collaborate on coalition builds. They raise awareness with the local police and sheriffs. Our UPS drivers pull a mobile museum that serves as an education hub for law enforcement and for individuals. And we want our employees to be trained to see the signs of human trafficking so that they can give credible tips to law enforcement.
Yeah, that sounds excellent. Well, there's a lot of challenges, I'm sure, when you are dealing with this massive issue. What would you say is the biggest challenge you've faced as a foundation when it comes to addressing this issue?
You know, there are a lot of challenges out there. I think right up there at the top is raising awareness about the magnitude of the crime and the proximity of the crime to people every day. We're inclined to think this happens somewhere else. Okay. And it looks like taken, or it looks very, commercialized as if it's, a movie. And that's not how human trafficking occurs. It's hidden in plain sight. And so awareness is the first issue. The second is convincing people that it's okay to trust their gut and to report. Sometimes it's that bystander apathy, right? You're worried about, is it what I really see? Could I be wrong? It's okay to be wrong as long as you are acting in good faith. And so that's what we really want to train folks to know, how to get in touch with law enforcement or call 911, to trust their gut, because traffickers rely on the fear of victims And so a lot of times victims are not going to self-report. Often victims and survivors have told us that they didn't even know the words human trafficking. They didn't realize they were in a situation that was unlawful because sometimes they're under the influence of drugs. And so it is up to the good standing general public to know the signs and not be afraid to make the call to law enforcement.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay. Well said. You've been around for a long time, as you mentioned earlier. What was it that caused the UPS Foundation to really say, hey, we're going to make this our cause? Like, this is going to be the primary emphasis of our foundation's dollars. What led to that decision? I'm curious on that.
So almost 8 years ago, we were talking with the state attorney general of Georgia, who basically highlighted that Atlanta had a huge issue with human trafficking. And it was driven in part by the Atlanta airport, that is a big international hub, the fact that Atlanta has lots of sporting events, and the fact that there's a huge convention center. So that confluence of mix creates, unfortunately, an environment where human trafficking thrives. And so when we realized that a lot of survivors are moved through the transportation network, we realized that there was an opportunity for us to see something and say something. Most survivors have either been sold at a truck stop, they've been moved through an airport, they've been moved on a train, a plane. And we, as one of the largest logistics providers in the world, we know something about logistics networks and all of those different areas where we might have an opportunity to see something. And so when we felt like we wanted to make a difference in the world, it was using our drivers who are already out there being the everyday heroes for people. A little bit of training to make them aware will go a long way. If we can just save one person, we will have done our job.
We'll be right back. Are you ready to revolutionize your advocacy efforts and significantly impact policy change? Discover Quorum and level up your advocacy to better educate more lawmakers. Quorum is the only unified public affairs platform that empowers nonprofits to map, track, change, and report on the policy landscape, all in one place. Explore how Quorum Grassroots helps nonprofits create compelling campaigns in minutes. The result? Your nonprofit doesn't just participate in the advocacy, it drives it. Quorum, where influence meets innovation. You can learn more at quorum.us. Hey, friends, and thanks so much for listening to the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. I want to let you know that I've recently become a professional certified coach. With my nearly 30 years of nonprofit experience, I know firsthand how hard you work as a leader. I also know how important it is to have someone you can call on to get help with the barriers, the leadership challenges that you will face both professionally and personally. And I really want people to thrive, to become all they were meant to become by providing coaching and consulting services. So if coaching is something you've always been interested in, but maybe weren't quite sure what it was all about, I encourage you to reach out. You can go to my website, robharder.com, or just email me at rob@robharder.com. I would happy to provide a free sample coaching session so you can determine if coaching is for you. All right, thanks again for tuning in. Now back to the show. Well, I'm sure you have a lot of stories of impact you've had. Maybe you could share one or two where the UPS Foundation really has made a significant impact in the lives of those caught up in human trafficking. Maybe you could share a couple of those.
I sure will. One of the great ways that we're making a difference is through our partnership, again, with Wellspring Living's apprentice program. And this is around workforce development, where survivors come and work with our HR talent acquisition department. They develop skills, they develop their resume. And that's really being a part of reducing recidivism rates, because it's one thing to rescue, but if you can prevent someone from going back on the street because they have a good job and they feel safe, that is a home run. And so since 2020, 75% of those graduates have found full-time jobs within 90 days. And that's amazing, not just within UPS, but also at other companies. And we're helping to underwrite that success. We have also partnered with Truckers Against Trafficking to create internal training, not only for our drivers, but for our management team and their families. So we've trained more than 189,000 UPSers to recognize the signs and report these crimes. And again, we know that this effort is going a long way to raise awareness and to help people survive.
Yeah. When you mention it a couple of times now, that awareness is so important, just raising awareness. A lot of people don't want to think it happens right here in our backyard. Whatever city you happen to be in, Atlanta, you mentioned, is one of the hot spots, it sounds like. Now, World Day of Trafficking Persons is actually today, and we're able to, get you on our show to really highlight the importance of this. So how can nonprofits best raise more awareness about human trafficking, even if it's not their primary mission, but maybe they can partner with you or even just to get the word out, particularly in those communities where it is so prevalent?
Thanks so much for that question. Nonprofits can really make a difference, number one, by educating themselves and making sure that they're aware of the signs of human trafficking. Going on the Polaris website, Polaris runs the National Anti-Human Trafficking website and the hotline. And it's important to see the signs and also to be able to raise money for other nonprofits to support what they're doing, because a lot of times you can engage with collaborative support, but then also volunteering. I think that's another way that once we know that there are victims out there who are in need, there's a lot of ways that nonprofits can get involved and volunteer and lend their special opportunities to be able to make a difference.
That's fantastic. So maybe one last question about the foundation itself. Sounds like you are in the process of really supporting a lot of other nonprofits that are doing this work, and you're really primarily both a funder and a provider of volunteers from your company. Is that correct? Is that pretty much how the foundation operates?
That is exactly right. We are a funder. And then because we have 450,000 UPS employees,
that's amazing. Wow.
Volunteerism is one of the ways that we show up best. In fact, we have a goal of delivering 30 million volunteer hours to communities by 2030.
30
that's
million
right.
hours. Wow, that's a lot of volunteer hours. Congratulations. Love it.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
For my listeners, then, how can they find out a little bit more about you and learn more about the UPS Foundation?
Well, to learn more about the UPS Foundation, visit about.ups.com. And to learn more about our anti-human trafficking effort, you can check out a really cool special that we did with the Lifetime channel. It's called The Balancing Act. You could Google The Balancing Act and then /UPS-delivering-hope. So that's thebalancingact.com/UPS-delivering-hope.
Excellent. Well, again, on this day of World Day of Trafficking Persons, thank you so much for sharing your heart about this and what UPS Foundation is doing. It's actually really impressive. And you have the resources, you have the volunteers, you have the financial resources as well. So thanks. And thanks for being on the show and sharing a bit more about what you do.
It's my pleasure. And thank you to you for the opportunity to spread this message. We couldn't do this without you.
Hey, friends. Well, I wanted you to know that this podcast can be found on iTunes, Spotify, Amazon, Google Podcasts, and wherever you listen to other podcasts. I also want to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast with others. This will actually help us get this great content out to more nonprofit leaders just like you. You can also join the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast community. Find other resources and interviews of past guests all on my website, nonprofitleadershippodcast.org. Well, thanks again for listening. And until next time, keep making your world better. And don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, the Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. Go to YouTube and look up Nonprofit Leadership Podcast. We'll see you there.